Welcome once again to the Cow Report. I'm your host, Chuck Lee, and as usual, we're coming to you live from the downtown L.E. Phillips Memorial Library right here in the heart of beautiful downtown Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And of course, this is August, what is it, Fred?
August the 8th.
All right, this is August 8th.
Monday.
1994, and
all day.
That crusty old rusty voice you hear over there is Fred, the true Stafford. My trusty sidekick, been with me now, what, Fred, 20, 25 years?
No, I don't think it's that long.
Okay, well, we have a little music there in the background to lighten things up, and we got a wonderful time tonight, Fred. Boy, we got a lot to talk about, as usual.
You bet.
Now, of course, the program is brought to you by the wonderful world of Flavin and Flavin Pop from the mountains of the Chippewa Valley, Fred. And somebody's got their radio on, they can turn that off over there. Okay. Now, with us tonight, we have, you're probably wondering who the gentleman is in the middle of the studio camera there. And
who is he?
Fred's probably wondering because he's sitting right next to him. Well, with us tonight,
he's sitting very close, too.
We're going to introduce him. His name is Ed Fromme, and he is with the U.S. Taxpayers Party, and you're the state chairman of the state of Wisconsin, aren't you?
That's true, Chuck. Glad to be here.
I want to welcome you to the program. And on this program, we like to stump the stars. Now, when there's no stars, we like to stump Fred. It's pretty hard, Fred. I think you batted 100% last time, didn't you? Something in that ballpark?
Yeah.
100, 150%, somewhere in there? Okay. On this date, first we ask Fred, and then we'll get to you, Ed. If Fred can't answer it, then we'll go to you. But if you can answer the question properly, you get a bottle of Flavin Pop.
Well, that's why I haven't been answering correctly. I don't want that slop.
Okay. Fred, the date, August 6th, the year 1890, about 1 minute after midnight, New York, Auburn Prison. What happened for the first time in history?
They must have electrocuted somebody.
He's right again. That's why we call him Fred, the true Stafford. Well, we ain't going to give away that bottle tonight, Fred.
Okay.
The first electrocution, Fred, 1890, August 6th. A condemned killer was put to death. Okay. We'll have to try stumping Ed later on. Okay, we got an announcement here. Tomorrow night, August 9th at 8 p.m. right here on Public Access, is the recorded version of the Citizens Fair that was held in July in Hobbs Arena, Altoona. And that was a candidates forum. Ed, you were at that, weren't you?
Yes, I was, yeah.
Yep, they had several tables there. It looks like there was about 20 different tables, and the United States Taxpayers Party of Wisconsin was one of the tables. Well, they're going to have a rebroadcast of the 3rd Congressional District candidates, August 9th at 8 p.m. So please be aware of that and tune in right here on Cable Channel 11. Okay, now Ed, you're the state chairman of the U.S. Taxpayers Party of Wisconsin. Why the U.S. Taxpayers Party of Wisconsin instead of the Republican Party for one of the counties? Why did you choose taxpayers over Republican or Democrat?
Well, I decided to get involved in politics 2 years ago, mainly because of the pro-life movement. And I kept on looking at the people who were involved in the rescues and saying there would really be no reason for people to be blocking doors of clinics if we had the right people in office. And so I started looking at a way to begin bringing about the right people in office, and I looked at both the Democrats and Republican parties and saw that the leadership of both of those parties was working in the direction that opposite direction that I wanted to go. And so therefore I was looked around for a new political party to be involved in, and that party I felt was the U.S. Taxpayers Party. It was just being started at that time by a gentleman by the name of Howard Phillips. Howard was running for president in '92 and using his presidency to kick off the formation of the party. And so I got involved in his candidacy, campaigning for him, and then after the campaign, worked with people here in Wisconsin to get the Taxpayers Party organized here in Wisconsin.
Mhm. Now, from time to time, there are videos on public access with from the Conservative Caucus, which is pretty much Howard Phillips has a lot to do with that. He created that, so his videos are seen here on public access from time to time. Now, Howard Phillips, is he kind of the spiritual leader or the actual head of the U.S. Taxpayers Party nationally, or how does that exactly work?
Well, Howard's kind of the most visible leader because he was the presidential candidate in '92, which helped get things going. And but there are actually a number of leaders around the nation that were involved in starting the U.S. Taxpayers Party. We've got George Grant, author, pro-life leader in Tennessee, a gentleman by the name of Don McElvaney out in Colorado. These are people that are known in the Christian community that helped get the Taxpayers Party going, among others, R.J. Rushdoony, Otto Scott, a group of other people also. So it's not just Howard, but Howard just happens to be the person who is in the limelight because he was the presidential candidate in '92.
Now, Howard, he was on the guy from Chattanooga. You saw it last Sunday night.
Somebody told me,
Yeah.
Ankerberg.
Yeah, he was on John Ankerberg, and they're talking about the coming economic earthquake. I guess Howard was interviewed for part of that series. It'll be, I guess you can purchase tapes of that if you watch that program. And John McElvaney now, he's got some very serious connections with the CIA and FBI, and he has his own McElvaney report that reports on where we're at with the economy, and he's been warning of some serious repercussions coming upon the United States because of the economy being we're so far in the hole financially, and so he puts out a very good newsletter that has some a lot of
Excellent newsletter.
almost quasi-intelligence. It's almost like he's still working for the CIA. Some of that stuff he tells us about up to a year before the media picks up on it.
Mm-hmm. And all these guys are warning us are based about things that are simply symptoms of the direction in which our country is going. We have bought into the big government lie here in the United States. Both Democrats and Republicans like the idea of spending lots of tax money. It is not the idea of limited government that our founding fathers had when they originally gave us the Constitution. And that's one of the reasons why I'm involved in the Taxpayers Party, because we are preaching limited government. We challenge everything the government spends money on. Is this a legitimate reason, a legitimate thing for government to be involved in? And the founding fathers had very narrow, specific things that government should have been involved in, and we feel that we need to get our government back to that. The reason we're running into so many economic problems is because the government is trying to micromanage our society, and as the government gets involved in more and more things from our day-to-day life, things are going to get much more difficult to handle, and in order to actually manage it, you're going to have to get a very repressive totalitarian government, much like Russia had, in order to keep managing it the way they're doing right now.
You know, I was sitting there watching C-SPAN today. You can watch the House hearings live when they're in session, and it just dawned on me. Here, these congressmen, Republicans, Democrats, I think there's one socialist in there, and the rest are Republicans, Democrats. They introduce a bill, some big, giant money bill, billions of dollars involved, and then they argue back and forth, whittle away at it. But they're creating a whole new giant bureaucracy every time, or a mini bureaucracy within a giant, every time they introduce one of these bills. Mm-hmm. And then they come back and say, well, we cut it back. I mean, here it was, this giant, say, $10 billion bill, we cut it back to $8 billion. What more do you want? What's wrong with saying we didn't want the whole thing to begin with?
Well, and that's the problem I see with the two major political parties. No one asks the questions about, is this legitimate to even have? Clinton comes forward with his health bill, and what do the Republicans do? Do they say government shouldn't be involved in health care? No, they say, well, we got our own. It's just a little bit more conservative than the Democrats. And what we have now is our definition of conservative and limited government has become a comparative definition. The Republicans compare themselves to the Democrats. Since we're more conservative than them, since we're for less government than them, then we're limited government, we're conservative. That is not the definition of the Founding Fathers. It's not the definition of the Taxpayers Party.
I think Howard Phillips put it pretty good once. He said, what do you want? The Democrats are going over the cliff 100 miles an hour, or the Republicans that are going 75? They're both going over the same cliff.
Mm-hmm.
And that cliff is that the economy is ready to crash. And who's gonna help crash it quicker, Republicans or Democrats?
Correct.
Like Howard said, I got in there under the Nixon administration. I was gonna close down one of the government agencies. He got in there and got mired in a bunch of bureaucratic gobbledygook, and never even got to shut down the budget at all.
There's very little desire on behalf of the people in both parties. Some in the Republican Party, but for the most part, the desire of the leaders is not to shrink government. They only want to stop it from growing as fast. You find that in the rhetoric about the deficit. You know, when they talk about the growth of the deficit, they don't talk about how much the deficit was reduced. They just say the growth of the deficit was less. We want to reduce the deficit. We want to get out of debt. And you have to listen to the rhetoric and look at what they're talking about, and then go back and look at the Founding Fathers and see what they had in mind for government. And basically what we have now in this country are two parties that have bought into socialism. One has bought into it more than the other, and no one is arguing the definition of limited government that the Founding Fathers had. That's why the Taxpayers Party is needed, because we're bringing a message that is no longer talked about by either of the two major parties.
Well, you know, I'm running for Congress, and I got a questionnaire from the Milwaukee Journal. Want to know how I feel about the health care plan and how I could improve upon it. Well, according to the latest polls, 65% of the people don't want it at all. They want it to go back to Congress and let them start over from scratch. So why should I buy into a failed system that the Democrats laid it on the table? Here it is, 1/7 of the nation's economy. We want to socialize the whole thing. The Republicans say, well, let's not go that far, but we'll get our foot wet and we'll get this thing going in the right direction. So the Republicans are going gung-ho for 100% socialism. I mean, the Democrats are, because they introduced it. The Republicans are saying, well, let's start out with 50, 60%. Let's not jump in overboard here. But now the population is so confused on this thing. They just said, we don't want nothing to do with it, go back and start over.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned something that was interesting, and that's the idea of public opinion polls. One of the problems that I see in our country today is the fact that the people that we are electing are basically ruling on public opinion polls. They kind of stick their finger in the air and see which way the wind is blowing. One of the problems that brings is that we've gotten away from discussing principles. And even though 65% of the people in the United States don't like the idea of government involved in health care, that's not the reason I oppose health care. I oppose health care because, on principle, it is not government's responsibility to be involved in it. That's something that's got to be taken care of in the free market system. And so I oppose it simply on principle, not on the fact that the people in the opinion polls say that they don't like it. And that's one of the things that, as the Taxpayers Party takes all their positions back to very basic principles. And we don't care about the public opinion polls. What we do care about is what are the best principles of government for us to operate under. And that is what we feel is what will turn this country around, not public opinion polls. Relying on a public opinion poll is kind of like two wolves and a sheep sitting down and deciding what we're going to have for dinner. The majority can be wrong. And if the majority in America decided in an up-down vote to make black people slaves, if your first premise is that we have to rely on democracy and majority rules, well, that means the majority can bring in something that is definitely wrong. And so we want to go back to basic principles. Our government was founded by our founders gave us a constitutional republic. A republic is the rule of law, and we democratically elect representatives to administer the law for the people. And we don't elect representatives to decide what the law is supposed to be. We have to get back and to the basics. What is law, and what are the basic principles under which a government should operate?
Well, that brings us to a good question about Congress. At one time in the history of this country, the Congress people were citizen legislators. I mean, they didn't spend all their time in Washington. They went out there, took care of business, and then they went back to their districts and took care of the people. Now it's almost the reverse.
The Founding Fathers, and this is kind of humorous, they put in the Constitution that Congress must meet once a year. They gave the Congress so few things to do that they had to put it in the Constitution that the Congress must meet at least once a year, because they figured they may not end up meeting. Now we can't get them out of session. And one of the key things that in the statement that you just made, Chuck, is that we elect people to Congress, and they may go there initially with the ideals to do the right thing, but they get caught up in the Washington society and the give and take and the pressure from their party leadership, etc. And because they don't get back to the district except to run for elections, they begin thinking like everybody inside the Beltway, and they aren't really representing the people that are back home.
Now they used to call that fiefdoms, where each person's got their little power center, and that's what we've turned. We've got 435 of them out there in Congress now, and another 100 in the Senate. But you wouldn't believe it, or you would believe the perks that go along with being a congressman, the franking privileges. My opponent, Gunderson, just did a mailing on around July 12th, the cutoff date where he could do this in an election year. He mailed out 294,000 pieces of propaganda at the taxpayer's expense. The postage was paid by the taxpayer, the printing, the setup, the delivery, the folding, everything was done at taxpayer's expense. 294,000 of those jettisoned into the 3rd District. Now this goes on all over the United States, and they call it franking privilege, and they say that they're giving up-to-date news on what's happening in Congress. But I say baloney. I say it's just a propaganda piece to help get reelected. And that's why I'm getting to now. What do you think about term limits?
It is in the Taxpayers Party platform that we are for term limits. We believe that that should be part of our Constitution. The argument against term limits is sometimes you're going to turn out someone who's good. And we say, well, occasionally you may have to do that, but the benefit of moving incumbents out and putting new people in, and the benefit that will be to our society, far outweighs the fact that every once in a while you may turn out a good person. If the person is good, then they should run for higher office. The other aspect of term limits that I support, and which is also supported by a group here in Wisconsin called Wisconsin Term Limits, and you should have their people as a guest sometime, Chuck, but is the term limit has the person sit out for one election cycle and then can run again. And to me, that will eliminate the professional politician, because that person has to come back into the work area and get a job back in society for those 2, 4, 6 years, whatever they're turned out, before they can run again, and that will keep them in touch with the people. Okay,
Ed, getting back down to the state of Wisconsin now, you've kind of got a dual role going on here. You're not only the state chairman of the U.S. Taxpayers Party, but you just so happen to be running against Governor Tommy Thompson for governorship. And it's a big state, so how's that campaign looking?
Well, the campaign's going along fine. I'm under no delusions about running as a new political party and running against someone who is as popular as Tommy Thompson. I disagree with Tommy Thompson's definition of limited government, as I explained before. He calls himself a limited government governor, and he talks about the fact that he kept the Wisconsin income tax rate low, but during his time in office, the number of employees employed by the state of Wisconsin has gone up. That's big government. The total amount of money spent by the state of Wisconsin has gone up. That's more big government. And the total amount of general revenue funds collected has gone up. That's more big government. And the only reason he calls himself a limited government governor is because if a Democrat had been in there, it had gone up even faster. And so we've got to stop this comparative definition of limited government and get back to the principle, the very founding principle of what is government legitimately expected to do. And very basically, I say that it is basically expected to do the very minimum things to keep the society in order. It is responsible for punishing criminals. That's a very basic thing. In fact, that's the number one thing that government is responsible for, and we're not even doing that properly anymore. So we challenge many of the things that are going on with the government, and one of the main reasons that I'm running is to begin taking that message back out to the people. You know, some of the things we talk about, say for instance, we want to privatize the public education system. We don't want government administered health care, and we don't want government administered charity. Now those are three pretty big things, and the fact that I'm saying to people we don't want government involved in that sounds pretty extreme, but extreme is comparative. In late 1950s, early 60s, if you'd have had a Jocelyn Elders as Surgeon General, if you'd have had Ruth Bader Ginsburg talking about lowering the age of sexual consent to 12, which she has written, if you'd had congressmen and legislators standing up saying, I want to distribute condoms in the high schools, that would have sounded very extreme back then. And so extreme is only a matter of comparison. And so we're going out there and talking about these things now simply because they need to be expressed. The big government people in both the Republican and Democratic Party don't want to talk about it because they like spending our tax dollars. They like having that power and control of the money. And we feel the tax dollars should stay with the people. They should make the decisions as to how they should spend the money, not the politicians.
Okay, on this show, Ed, we take live calls, and we're going to see who we got on the air. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Hello, Chuck. How you doing tonight?
Okay, how are you?
But this is a question directed towards Ed. Maybe you could just highlight the platform real briefly of the U.S. Taxpayers Party. And we all like to say, gosh, let's downsize government, let's dismantle it. But specifically, what does he have in mind?
Okay.
Could you just talk about that a little bit?
Well,
Okay, thank you.
I mentioned three things. I mentioned, and these are three of the biggest things, I think, that are on our minds right now. Number one is the privatization of education. We've all come to accept public education here in the United States. But the first 30 years of our government, we did not have public education. We had a very good system of private education. We had literacy rates above 95% in most areas of the country, and even the poor at that time were being educated, if they wanted to be educated, because there were the system of charity schools also. So we do not need public education anymore in the country. It's something that the government does a very poor job of doing. And ever since they've gotten a hold of it, the quality of education in this country has gone down slowly, more and more each year. Think what can happen if we go to a system of privatized education. Number one, you will have a wider variety of education opportunities out there in the free market. You can have companies who will offer to school the children of their employees as part of the benefits package. You'll have your private education, your private church school related schools, but you'll have secular schools. You'll have schools that are for profit. With the information superhighway coming down the line, there is actually will be very little need to build multi-million-dollar structures and gather kids in them in 20 or 30 in groups of 20 or 30 at a time to school them, when you could put them in small groups in homes or in other smaller structures with some of the best educators in the country available to them via computer systems, satellite systems, etc. What we have right now is our country being forced into one mode of education, and teachers being forced into one area of education, and not being able to use their full talents because they're tied in with a specific curriculum that's being decided at state level and now at federal level by a centralized government. And so that's one area. That would be probably one of the biggest areas. In fact, in the state of Wisconsin, we spend more money in that area than any other area. If that was privatized, that would certainly help. We want to get rid of government charity. Charity is not government's responsibility, it's individuals' responsibility. We will, while living up to our current commitments for people who are in the Medicaid and in the Social Security programs, we would eventually begin phasing those out too. All the money that was put into Social Security programs were put in private investments and private retirement programs. We would not have people living from our elderly living from month to month waiting for their Social Security check to show up. They would have had lots of money built up over those years. But what we've done through those programs is we take money and we give it to the government and we allow them to use it in other ways rather than having it invested for the benefit of our senior citizens. But we need to live up to those commitments in those areas, but begin phasing those out and getting the government out of those programs because they do not run them very well. So let's talk about another area. Let's talk about the National Endowment for the Arts, or even on the state level we support the arts. That's not government's responsibility. That's individual citizens who want to decide to support the arts in any manner that they might. But it's not the decision of a government official to decide which arts tend to be supported. That should be involved as part of the culture as far as what the people want to support. And so those are just some of the things that we would be looking at as far as getting the government out of.
Okay, so you don't want any government art, which is kind of like saying government religion. Well, there's a government art because if the government's funding a certain kind of art, then that's government art.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want government schools because the government right now, the way the system is set up, all the money flows to school districts who have a hierarchy with a bunch of fat cats making $100,000 a year, sitting on top of these millions, and a little handful of school board members deciding where this money goes. Well, in Wisconsin, the state decides where a lot of it goes. And that's been for years tied to the real estate property, which they're trying to break away from now, and they're getting into a can of worms. And you don't want government charity. But I think the government at one time, didn't they call for a certain amount of welfare for the populace? You know, there are needy that are going to always need
Correct.
to be helped.
Yes.
But, I mean, it's got a lot of hand, though, the charity.
Well, even though the government called for it, I don't believe they had a legitimate right to do it. Like I said, the Taxpayers Party challenges things that the government is doing, and charity can be handled on the local level. Some people ask, well, where's all this money going to come from? Well, right now, if we look at the amount of taxes that all areas, all levels of government take from us at this point, the latest figure that I heard is about 58% of taxes that can be identified that are right out there in front. But then you add to that the hidden taxes, because what I mean by hidden taxes, say for instance, taxes on corporations. Corporations don't pay taxes. We think they do, but what they do is when they get another expense from the government in the area of taxes, they pass it along to the consumer. The consumer actually pays that tax. Everybody who's in business has a certain amount of profit that they're looking at making, and so when they get an added tax to it, they just up the price of their product. Eventually, the price of their product will get so high that they can't be in business and they'll go out of business. But in essence, the consumer actually pays that tax. Approximately 70%, by my estimation and other people's estimations, of the fruits of our labor actually go to the government. And if we lowered the amount of taxes back to what I believe is a moral level, which is under 10% of our total income, we would be returning back to the people 50 to 60% of their money that they now have the opportunity to spend on education for their children, on health insurance plans, on supporting the charities that they would want to support, on supporting the arts that they would want to support. Right now, government takes away so much of that decision-making from the average person because they take so much of the average person's income.
Okay, well, we're going to be taking some more calls here, but I want to remind the folks that in upcoming programs, Fred, you know now we're getting back into the school season and back into the fall schedule, so you know who's coming back on the show.
Who?
Cooking with Carlos
Oh, my goodness.
and Jim Grainbelt, Kung
That
Fu
is
Garbage Cop.
probably killed more people there that's cooking with Carlos than you can shake a stick at.
Well, that will be on the fall lineup, and of course Jim Grainbelt, Kung Fu Garbage Cop.
I know that's
He's got a tire drive.
That's what a cooking with Carlos serves that Jim Grainbelt's garbage.
I was talking to Jim the other day now, and they've got a tire drive. I guess Aristide's needing tires for Haiti when he takes back over, so they've got a nationwide tire drive going right now for the necklacing that they're going to do over there when they get back in power. So I guess they're paying up to $2 a tire. You can take them out there to the landfill. Jim says get them out there to the landfill, and they're paying $2 a piece right now because they need them for the upcoming invasion in Haiti. Okay, so we're going to take a call now, and before we take that call, I just wanted to say that, you know, we got congressmen that say, gee, I went to Washington and I got back $10 billion for the state of Wisconsin. And I say, well, why did we send them $100 billion to begin with? You only got back 10% of it? You're not doing too hot.
We've
Call
evolved.
it barrel, but you know, they bragged that they got back 10% of our money that we shipped out there.
Politically, we've evolved into what I call a slave mentality on the state level. And that is, a slave is a person who has the fruits of his labor stolen. The slave mentality, I believe, is the slave who goes to the person who is stealing the fruits of their labor and begs for scraps from the table. And we send congressmen and we send senators to Congress, and what they do is they go and beg for scraps from the table. We've got a governor who goes to Washington and lobbies to get more of our money back to the state of Wisconsin. He's begging for scraps from the table. And we have to start electing legislators and governors and other people who aren't going to beg for scraps from the table. They're going to have to stand up to the federal government and say, constitutionally, you do not have the right to take this from us because it's for unconstitutional purposes.
Unfunded mandates.
Unfunded mandates, just a variety of things. There are 5 states and 5 western states who have passed sovereignty legislation to this point. And that's one of the messages that I'm taking to the people, is that we need to begin doing that in the state of Wisconsin. And what sovereignty legislation is doing is reaffirming the rights of the states under the 10th Amendment. There used to be a principle, which we have lost, which we need to get back again, called concurrent sovereignty. Shortly after the Third Congress, just right after our country was founded, Congress passed a bunch of laws which were not very favorable, and Kentucky, Virginia, and North Carolina passed resolutions in their state which stated that those federal laws were unconstitutional and they would not be obeyed in those states. Well, that's kind of unheard of in our time, but what they realized at that time is the principle of concurrent sovereignty, and that was the federal government was given so much to do under the Constitution, and that's it. Everything else was left to the states. And as soon as the federal government got involved in what the states was supposed to do, the states had the right to say, back off. You were not given the authority to do that. In 1859, the Wisconsin Supreme Court struck down a federal law, the Fugitive Slave Act, and said it was unconstitutional. We do not hear, we would not think of our state Supreme Court telling the federal government these days that the federal law was unconstitutional. But back then, that principle existed. And we need to begin reasserting that, telling the federal government to get back within its limits and give the states back control of the areas they should have control of.
Okay, we'll take a call here. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, this is the Cow Report.
Yes.
Hi, Chuck.
Hello.
I got 3 questions for you and your guests, so maybe you want to write these down.
How many?
3.
Well, we got time for one, so pick the best one here, because we got people backed up here a mile long. We've got a battery of beautiful women in the other room taking the phone calls, and we'll take one now, and then maybe you can get back in line and for another call later.
Okay. Well, my I guess the most important question is, given that we've got this huge government, this large federal government that's imposing all these taxes and mandates and regulations on us, I mean, somebody's responsible. Somebody put this government in power and has been putting it in power now for a good 60, 70 years, since even since 1914, so that's when we had our first income tax. Who is responsible for this, or who do you think is responsible, and shouldn't we be more straightforward about pointing the finger at these people?
Okay, good question. Thanks a lot, caller. Ed, who's responsible for this mess we're in?
Well, part of the responsibility relies with the voters. They simply have not been good citizens. They haven't educated themselves to the point of understanding who they're putting in office, what those people stand for. Our population in general has basically gotten soft. They've liked the materialism that they have that we have in this country. They don't want to be bothered with politics. They just want to, do their job, spend their money, go home to their kids, etc. And also, the education system hasn't been training people and telling people about our heritage, what limited government is all about, what our founding fathers actually stood for, what our Constitution actually meant, and because of that, we have a constitutionally illiterate electorate which does not basically hears what they want to hear and basically votes for the person who promises them the most. And in the short run, that may sound good to an individual, but in the long run, it's affecting the liberty of our country. It doesn't help, of course, having the dominant media, or the media dominated by people who like large centralized government. There's no question that the people in power in both the Democrat and Republican Party, the national media, are all globalist in nature. They like centralized power. They believe themselves as the ruling elite, and they know better than anybody else how to rule. And so they are guiding this country toward a centralized federal government, and eventually they want to guide us to a centralized world government. And the Taxpayers Party is not for that. We believe the best government is decentralized government, where there's more local control and more local accountability.
Well, somebody said once the power to tax is the power to destroy. And we came a long way to destroying this country through taxation. It's kind of like a poker game where there's one guy that's in the circle, and all he does is pull money out of the pot and put it over here all the time. He keeps pulling out 5–10% of every pot. Eventually, by the end of the night, the guy that keeps pulling that money off to the side for the house, as you'd say, is the one that's going to control, he's going to have all the money.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what our government does. They keep taking a bigger share every year. Okay, Fred, before we take another phone call, we're going to give you your big chance.
Yes.
To ask Ed a question. You said you'd have 4 or 5 good questions lined up.
How do you feel about prayer in the schools?
Well, I'm against prayer in public schools because I'm against public schools. The government shouldn't be involved in schools in the first place. And I think when we talk about prayer in public schools, when we talk about creationism in public schools, when we talk about government getting involved in vouchers, we're talking about symptoms, problems of our educational system that we can get rid of by simply getting the government out of education and allowing the private sector and allowing the free market economy to decide what type of educational institutions we're going to have. So I don't even address prayer in public schools because I believe we shouldn't have public schools.
Well, you think about it, do we really want to have a government religion set up in the school system which might end up being New Age or Muslim or Catholic or Jewish or Baptist? That's what people are afraid of.
We already have a secular humanism being taught in the schools.
Well,
if you like it, do it.
So you want to change that to have a Muslim religion in schools?
No, I don't want to change it to have a Muslim. You know darn well that.
That's what's going to happen, though, if you set up a government religion.
We're not setting up a government religion. To say a prayer, a non-denominational prayer, isn't setting up a religion.
Who's going to make the prayer up, though?
Well, I'll make it up if you want one.
Well, maybe somebody doesn't agree with your prayer.
Well, that's all right. They can.
That's the
I
problem we
got
got.
just as much right to make that up and to pray in a school. And when I went to school, they read the Bible. We prayed in school in a public high school in New York City.
That was many years ago.
That's
Fred.
many years ago in the 30s.
It's a public school, but the problem is they've got so much money and there's so much that's conglomerated into the public school system now. You don't. I guarantee you that your prayer would never make it in there, Fred.
Oh, I'm not, I wouldn't doubt that. I wouldn't doubt
You
that.
have some whitewashed new world order prayer in there that you'd be praying to some idol over in
We'd
Istanbul.
be praying
or
to
something.
Almighty God. Why not say our Lord's Prayer?
Not in the socialist school system, you wouldn't be. Well, let's take a call here, Fred. Go ahead, caller. You're on the air.
It sounds like you got some good ideas, Ed, and I think you're on the right track. But how will we rid ourselves of these factions, these groups, such as the NEA, WEAC? How are we going to rid ourselves of those factions that keep this system as it is in existence? And maybe, in addition to Ed saying something, maybe Fred's got some ideas. How do we get rid of those factions?
Well,
Yeah, thank you, caller.
we gotta send our children to non-public schools. In other words, the private schools.
That's why I say until we can get this public school monolith dismantled, we need vouchers and tax breaks for school-aged children.
We're not going to get vouchers, I don't think. And with vouchers are probably going to go government control. So you don't get it with no strings attached.
Well, you got to start somewhere.
Anything that comes from the federal government has strings attached. They tell you how you're going to use it.
Fred, right now you got one monolithic socialist school system. You got to start dismantling it somewhere. It's not going to happen overnight. Vouchers is a good way to start breaking it up. I personally think it'll create jobs for teachers, principals.
One of the groups that the caller mentioned are groups that thrive simply because there is one centralized decision-making process, and they only have to influence one or two or three or four people. And that's where the citizens have to start electing people who are going to look at decentralizing government and getting government back to local accountability. When our school system, when the public school system was under local school boards, it was far better off because there was local accountability. Now, and the groups like the NEA and those and the other groups like that had to deal with each individual school board. But as the state and the federal government have grabbed more control, and we gave them the ability to grab control by having public schools in the first place, but as they have grabbed more control, then those groups have more influence because they only have to go after a certain number of legislators rather than a whole bunch of school board members. We need to begin electing people who say they will begin decentralizing the power of government. When you go out and you talk to a candidate and you ask him a question, you have to say, what will he do to decentralize the power of government and turn things more over to local control? If he's not going to say he's going to do something along those lines, don't vote for him, because he's the type of person, or she, that wants to play, that likes to play with your money, that likes to have the power with spending your dollars, and likes to have power. And what we have to do is we have to start electing people who don't want to have power, who want to decentralize government, who are going to make decisions for the good of the country. And you simply have, it's going to start with the people, and they're going to have to decide on how to begin electing the proper people.
I think people will get creative once they start thinking about dismantling this mess we're in. They'll start getting creative, and we'll have some great ideas coming out of this country. We're a very innovative and progressive country. We know how to create things. Look, we put a man on the moon in less time than John F. Kennedy called for. He didn't live to see it, but when we want to, we can do things in this country. Let's take another call. Go ahead, caller. You're on the air.
Hey, Doug, you know that bottle of Flavin Pop on your desk?
Yeah.
Do you use the bottle in your mouth and suck on it?
I think we had a wrong number there. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air. Hello?
Yeah, you got Benny Beminister, also known as the Common Man.
Okay, Common, how you doing?
Oh, not too bad. I was kind of listening there when you and your guest there were talking about some of the, like say, the federal programs and things like that, like well, like a little bit.
We got cut off there. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air. Oops. Hello?
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay. Good, now it's cleared up.
We are.
Okay, what's the question, Randy?
Well, the question, I guess, it has to do kind of with the SSI. That kind of makes up a lot of my income, I got to admit. And I won't kid you that it's probably not enough. Not anymore, at least. And it's not. And I'll tell you something. You try to get a job, and if you got a few medical bucks like I do, and even though they don't tell you, that's the reason they don't take you in. That usually is the reason. I can kind of figure it out. And I'll tell you something. In the last 2 or 3, 4 years here, I guess probably ever since the '90 tax bill went through, they've the amount of the rise as far as the cost of living rise of the SSI total checks has been going down.
Okay, so basically you want more money, is that it?
Well, I'm kind of curious, yeah, I to tell you the truth, I think it should go up.
Okay, Ed, what do you think about that? He wants to have more money to be on Social Security, whatever.
The Social Security, the way it was originally intended, if the people who passed that, if the government would live up to their original commitment to the people who put money into this gentleman would not be barely getting along on a Social Security income. The reason is that all that money pouring into the government was too big of a pot for corrupt people to leave their hands off of. So they've dove into it, and they've been spending it for other things, which is one of the reasons why we shouldn't trust government with our retirement funds. And the retirement fund should have been in private. If all this money that this gentleman put into SSI over the years had been put into a private retirement fund, he'd be living high off the hog right now.
Like mutual fund investment.
Right. And what we need to do is, first of all, as a
Can you imagine the stock market, how crazy it would go with those billions poured into it?
With that amount of money going into an investment, look at the amount of investment and jobs that would be generated if all that money was going into the private sector. But if the Taxpayers Party would, let's say, get control of the government tomorrow, some miracle happened, and we would take a look at the Social Security system, and all that money that was in there now for the current people would be looked at, passed into private private retirement funds, so they could continue to live off of that for the rest of their life, and would probably end up increasing as they're going through, because the government wouldn't be stealing the interest and the income that could be made from that money. But then at the lower level, we would begin cutting it off completely for other people, and begin encouraging them to get involved in the private system and get the government completely out of managing a retirement fund. The Taxpayers Party would be better for the person on retirement and Social Security, because we would not be stealing the funds that they had put in for using for other purposes.
Talk about stealing. There are no funds left in that Social Security. That is all there is a handful of IOUs. That money has been robbed from Peter to pay Paul, and it's been paying off other programs. There's nothing but IOUs in there.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually the government's going to have to say to people our age, sorry, there's not going to be any money for your Social Security.
Right.
And hopefully at that time they'll switch over to these individual retirement accounts where the money goes directly into mutual funds and creative ways of investing that are going to give us nice big piles of money at retirement time, 20, 30 years down the road. So let's take a caller. Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Yes, I have a couple questions for you regarding the government funding of some of the social programs like Social Security. In my opinion, it's not going to do a bit of good to have investments in the private sector, because who would manage that? And first of all, I mean, if you took it out of a centralized form as far as local or state governments, I think we all know that state and local governments can't pave roads. I mean, and if anyone, I think, if the government dealing with billions of dollars a year can't manage that kind of money, what makes you think that an individual private firm or a group of farmers per se or anyone else would know how to invest that money?
Individual private firms do it already. Do it right now already. They're already in the free market system, and if they don't make money with the money that people give to them, they're out of business. So it's already done in the private sector.
What happens to those people, though? That when they go out of business, what happens to those people? There are no guarantees.
Well, everybody takes a chance when they invest, and there are safe investments. There are riskier investments, and it's up to the person to put their money in there. But I'll tell you what, the few people that would be losing money by going in the private area is far less of a problem than the millions and millions of people who are getting their money stolen through the Social Security system that we have right now. I'm sorry, I'll put up with a few people who will lose in the private sector because the benefit is going to be far greater for the majority of the people than what our current system is at this point.
Well, I think that's sort of vacuous to say because you're dealing with such a number of people that, of course, it's the same thing you were just speaking of, except for it's a larger level.
Well, we got a massive theft going on now. That money is pouring in from all over the country into the so-called Social Security fund. And as soon as it hits that fund, it's stolen to pay for some other.
It's paying the interest on the deficit. That's where it's going. And pretty soon, as the deficit grows, there's going to be nothing left to pay anybody.
So what Ed was saying, it's better to have maybe 1 out of 100 go under than to have everybody go under because the whole thing is bankrupt.
If you took the safest investment there is right now, which is your basic standard savings account at the bank, and you get your 3.5% to 4% interest, or even if it was less, you would be doing far better by the time you retired than what you're doing by putting your money into Social Security. And you very, very, very seldom lose money that you put into bank savings accounts.
Call the miracle of compound interest. Just keeps compounding and compounding. Okay, go ahead, caller. You're on the air.
Yeah, I'm calling from the college campus area, and guys, I'm a competent listener. I want to talk to you a little bit about. Whoop, are you still there?
Yep.
How you guys gained all your credibility? Because I know you guys, what you say is true, and I've been reading, and everything I read guarantees what you say, and I want to learn about how I can become more like you.
Yeah, thank you. Very good question. Fred?
Yes, I would join the Conservative Book Club in Harrison, New York, read their books, read the New American Magazine, read Human Events. Those are conservative publications. You learn things in there which you don't find anyplace else. The American Spectator.
Sometimes you got to wade through a lot of garbage to find a diamond in the rough, Fred. And that's,
right.
You know, you might have to go through piles and reams and magazines and newspapers, but even in the liberal newspapers, once in a while you'll dig up a good little article or you'll find some little nugget of truth in there, and that's what you got to continue to do. And this system of massive amounts of information that is coming at us, you've got to be able to sort out the garbage from facts and start asking questions. Don't just, if you're sitting in a college classroom and you're getting nothing but socialist dogma day after day, start asking questions. Take the risk of getting a C or a D, but ask that professor what he's talking about. Ask him to prove it. Ask him to back it up with footnotes.
And read history. Stop watching television and start digging out and read history and read the people who actually wrote it. Don't read some historian's view about what happened at that time. Go back and read the documents of the Founding Fathers. Go back and read Blackstone on the law. Go back and read the Bible. Go back and read the history that is there, because you can't understand the present and where we're going now in the future unless you have a knowledge of history and what has happened in the past.
They used to say question authority, and it still holds true. sometimes authority might be feeding you a big old line of bologna. Right, Fred?
You bet.
Go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Hey, Fred,
Yes.
I got a question for you.
Yes.
Are you reading Playboy back there?
Absolutely not.
Okay, Fred, that was...
We're reading The Wanderer, a Catholic paper from St. Paul.
Okay, go ahead, caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, how you doing? This is Buck.
Hi, Buck, I haven't heard from you for a while.
I've been around. I see Bemnister called you tonight.
You been up north hunting or what?
Oh, yeah, up north hunting. Monday Night Football's on, but you guys are out pulling them as usual.
Well, that's why Jim Greenbelt and Cooking with Carlos are coming back into town to
There you go.
help keep them ratings
Yeah,
up
a
there.
quick question for Fred, and I want a quick question of your guest.
All right.
Fred, I saw you in church the other day, and you had that bandage on. Did some liberal hit you, or what happened?
No, we had a operation for skin cancer.
Oh, successful?
That's,
Yeah, we hope so.
that's
Okay.
the official line, Buck, but actually, he was part of the advance team for the invasion of Haiti,
Okay,
and he got wounded down there.
all right.
They shipped him back to the rear.
Probably a Navy SEAL.
Yep.
The guest on their Social Security deal, wouldn't people just be better off if they were told at a young age, better save a little bit for a rainy day? People seem to be able to take care of themselves better than the government. The government keeps trying to ram this concept down your throat that you're too stupid to take care of yourself, so we're going to. The other thing would be, what kind of advice do you have for young people now to provide for their retirement?
Well,
Okay, thanks a lot, Buck.
Buck asked some good questions. The government, people who desire power and the people who like centralized government want us to rely on them. And so that's why they keep pushing this at you. Well, we've got to have these programs. You can't take care of yourself, et cetera, et cetera. It would be much better for people to begin investing now. We've got to begin understanding as a population, if we want to live as free men, as our founding fathers understood it, with the liberties that our founding fathers wanted us to have, that we can't buy into this lie that we need a government mommy and daddy. And government has to be very small. We have to be relying personal responsibility, and the people around us, church and family, need to be supporting us, not the government. And so as far as advice to young people is stop accepting government support and start challenging everything the government does. I mean, is this a legitimate function of government? You should ask that of every person who's running. What is the legitimate function of government? And if they can't come up with a clear answer for you, don't vote for them, because you don't want them up there in Madison or in Washington deciding, well, I think this is going to be government now and this isn't, etc. They should know before they get there.
Okay, well, thank you, Ed.
They have to know right from wrong. They don't
That's
know
right.
right from wrong, they're not morally qualified.
Well, Fred, we're
Shouldn't
down
be
to
elected even to be dog catcher.
We're down to the last 30 seconds here, so I just want to remind folks that the Democrats hand you something clear. It's poison, but it's clear, and they say, here it is. Here's the socialist dogma. Take it for what it is. It's clear. You can see it's poison, but drink it. The Republicans, they take it. It's got a little bit of food coloring in it. It's the same poison. They put a little DD7 in it, clean it up a little bit, and hand it to you and say, here, drink it. This is good for you. They're both pushing the same poison, so think. Don't just say I'm Democrat or I'm Republican because Mommy and Daddy was or Governor Thompson is. Start thinking about government and what really government should be. So I want to thank you once again for tuning in to the Cow Report. I've been your host, Chuck Lee. We'll see you right here on Cable Access Channel 11 next Monday at 2 p.m. I want to thank all the staff, Craig Lee, Roy Rogers-Hoff, R.L. Robarge, and all the rest of the folks right here. Thank you, and we'll see you again next week. Good evening. The new $100 bill is out.